Sorry, and now everyone can hear me, right? Okay, I'm on a different laptop, different room, so we're getting used to this. Hello. Okay, good morning, everyone on Zoom, and welcome. Just making sure you all saw last week, there's a syllabus. If you didn't get the syllabus, it's for me as much as for you. Yeah, okay, great. Amazing. Thank you. Okay. Then, we are going to be finishing just a little bit from last week. So if you don't have last week's source sheet, we can pass these around. These are last week's. You guys all have last week's? Good job. Good students. She wasn't here. She wasn't here in person, so it's fair. Morning, Deb. Do you have last week's source sheet? Okay. Of course you do. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna turn this week's is yeah. This week's oh, they both have marked right on them. Okay. Okay, sorry for all the balagan this week's, okay? Looks like this. It doesn't have the bullet points. The one from last week has the bullet points and the syllabus looked totally okay. Okay, so we're going to finish up an idea from last week. I want to remind you and anyone who's just joining us, we are very much that over the last week and this week focusing on the idea as an introduction to this whole course of the idea of Am Skula, Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. The chosen people is the English translation, which actually we'll see is not a great translation. Rabbi Sachs has said that this is the first soundbite or mission statement, right? That we are a holy nation, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, right? It's a very short, pithy idea if we had to summarize what the Jewish people are. Now, how we interpret this phrase, as we really began to delve into last week and will continue this week, is really open to a lot of interpretation. And we can, I think, first of all, historically, how Jewish thinkers lived and where they lived had a huge impact in how they thought about this phrase. And that's certainly going to be true today as well. And throughout most of history is really a question of what makes the Jewish people the Am Skula. In the last, less than 100 years, the question becomes, what makes Israel, right? We're thinking much more about what makes Israel the homeland of the chosen people, in meaning, what makes this the chosen land? What makes this land special? Are we special? And we're going to see that Zionist thinkers really grappled with this question as well. So last week, just to summarize, we thought about, we really asked a big question, which is why does God choose? Why does God choose us? And why do we become chosen at that point in our story? We leave Egypt, okay, which was not nothing, right? Those of us who left Egypt and chose to follow God, that is significant in and of itself. And then we get to Sinai. And then there's this great, good morning, welcome. We get to Sinai and there's this great event where really the defining moment for all of the continuity of Jewish history and who we are, which is Ma'amad Har Sinai. What made us worthy of Har Sinai? What made us worthy of getting the Torah, of being the chosen people? And last week we explored the comparison to Abraham, okay, the mirror image of the single first Jew to be chosen as an individual to lead the covenant, and then how that paralleled the people. Now you might remember with Abraham that we explored this fascinating interpretive exegetical dilemma, which is Lech Lecha Ma'artzecha. Here, perfect. Now it's our parsha. Lech Lecha Ma'artzecha. Why? Why did God call him? What was special about him? We had big questions. At that point in the text, it doesn't seem like he did anything. The Midrashim rushed to fill in the famous stories of him breaking the idols. Correct? That's not in the Torah. That's in the Midrash. The famous story of him seeing a palace aflame and what that represents. All this stuff is beautiful, but it's reporting on what he does after he's Lech Lecha, after he's chosen, not before. So why Lech Lecha? And we saw that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had this really, as I mentioned last week, incredibly innovative and beautiful idea that just the fact that he heard God's call and followed was enough to make him worthy. When you take that idea, it's also very similar to the Jewish people at Sinai. So just to complete something from last week, we see that the same thing happens when we look at what happens in the Midrash on Matan Torah. Okay, so we're going to look at source 9 on last week's source sheet. Sorry for the jumping around. Last week's source sheet, source 9, which is the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, so it should be on page 5, source 9. Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael is the earliest midrash on the Torah. It is called Tanaitic Midrash, and each book has its own one, not Breshit, because this midrash was really composed around the legal issues, halacha. So it's often called Midrash Halacha, but it also has a lot of midrash which is not Jewish law, which is interpretive. And so the one on Sefer Shmot is called Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. And the Mechilta Rabbi Yishmael asks a really important question. So just a little bit of background for this question. The question it asks is, you'll remember that in Shemot 19, we're told we're going to get the Torah, we're going to be Mamlech Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, Am Skula, wonderful. However, after we get the 10 commandments, we then have Parshat Mishpatim with more commandments. And then we hear that God into us. People said in that part of the story in chapter 24 of Shemot, Na'aseh v'nishma. So without getting your minds too convoluted at 9:15 in the morning, why it's the commentaries go crazy. Why is chapter 24 where it is in the storyline? Because it seems to be bringing us back to the moment just before we got the Torah. And so the commentaries debate greatly. Is the chapter 24 in its correct place in the Torah, in the timeline? Or did it happen timeline-wise, history-wise, in chapter 19? And then, of course, if it's out of place, why is it there? We're not going to get into that. But why is this important? It's important for the Midrash we're about to read. The Midrash we're about to read is going to say something wild. It says, everything. Now, you'll remember last week I showed you the Midrash that we accepted the Torah by force. God held the mountain above our heads, okay? This Midrash says the complete opposite. This Midrash says that God, before giving us the 10 commandments, actually Moshe gave us some of the Torah, gave us a few mitzvot, te'ima, right? A tasting of the Torah. And there, that is when we said, yeah, okay, we're in. And so suddenly then, when we get to Har Sinai, when we're at the foot of the mountain and God gives us the 10 commandments, we've already proven we're worthy, right? We've already gone a step above. So let's look at what this Midrash says. It solves an interpretive issue of why chapter 24, it explains that chapter 24 is out of place, but that's a side issue for us. In source 9, it says, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Lech el ha'am v'kidashtam hayom u'machar kibzu simlotam. Vayomer Moshe, Lech el ha'am v'kidashtam hayom. Okay, it's going to give us, it's trying to give us a timeline of what's happening here. I'm going to read the English because it's going to be easier. The Lord said to Moshe, go to the people and make them ready today, the 4th day, and tomorrow, the 5th day. Ignore this. It's about the timing of the 3 days. And have them be ready for the 3rd day. When was the 3rd day? The 6th of Sivan, when the Torah was given. And what did Moshe do on the 5th day? He rose early in the morning and built an altar. Okay, this is mentioned in chapter 24. And he rose early in the morning and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain. He set up 12 monuments for the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so what is going on here? The Midrash, in this incredibly creative way, tries to solve a lot of problems. If we already got the 10 commandments and now we're starting to hear more laws, why is Moshe in chapter 24, after all of that, in the Torah's storytelling timeline, why is Moshe then standing at the foot of the mountain and building an altar and rising early to build an altar? That seems out of place. And so the Midrash solves that by saying, actually, that whole story that happened in chapter 24 is actually in the context of chapter 19. The Mefarshim call this Ein Mukdam Mu'achar b'Torah. There's no order in the Torah. Some commentaries don't accept that perspective. So if this is the case, what does the Midrash say actually happened before the 10 commandments were given? And he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the ears of the people. But we do not know where he read it. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi says, from the beginning of the creation until here. Rebbe says the mitzvot that were commanded to Adam, the mitzvot that were commanded to the sons of Noah, and the mitzvot that were commanded in Marah and all the other mitzvot. Okay, what is going on here? It is saying that chapter 24 teaches us that before we got the 10 Commandments, Moshe, through God through Moshe, gave the Jewish people the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, last week's Parsha, the 7 Noahide laws, certain other laws commanded to Adam, like pru or vu, have children, mitzvot that were given in the desert before they got to Sinai, meaning they had heard certain parts of Torah. They had an opportunity to have a tasting of Torah before they accepted the great revelation at Sinai. And the Midrash goes on and it explains further. Rabbi Yishmael says, what is written at the beginning? And the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, then the land shall rest a Sabbath to the Lord 6 years. This is the mitzvah of Shemitah, etc., etc. If you get to the bold, at this they said, we take it upon ourselves. When Moshe saw this, he took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled it upon the people, saying to them, you are hereby tied and bound and committed. Tomorrow come and take upon yourselves all the mitzvot. Okay, so the Midrash is doing something unbelievable here. It's saying, in a way, it's very similar to the Avraham situation, because Avraham, perhaps there's something beautiful in the fact that he wasn't this superstar, role model, perfect leader before being called, right? There's something very beautiful in that idea, because that means that all of us have an opportunity to be called and to grow into more higher spiritual role. The same is true with Matan Torah. If you want to accept this Midrash and say, well, why? What made us so special to be chosen? Well, then the Midrash tells us we already had followed God out of Egypt and accepted parts of the Torah. So then we were worthy of the great revelation at Sinai. But you could also say the same thing that the Lubavitcher Rebbe says about Avraham regarding the Jewish people. We were a group of ex-slaves. There was nothing unique or special about us at that point. But just the fact that we stood at Sinai and heard God's voice and accepted the Torah, that made us worthy. That in itself made us worthy of Matan Torah. And I think that these are some of the ideas that will keep coming up in what we're seeing in terms of how we view Shemot. What is the messages of Shemot for the Jewish people in times of Torah and also in today's world? So now this brings us to the question that I mentioned on the first day last week, which I think is still a really significant question and which will also carry us through this course. If until now we've talked so much about being the chosen people, well, what about the chosen state, right? Now I'll remind you that early Zionist thinkers, many of them wrote, Jabotinsky and Herzl, they wrote that, and we're going to see this in a minute, that the Jewish state, what is the purpose of the Jewish state? So the Jews could just be like any other nation. Well, the last 75 plus years have showed us that the Jews in their own homeland just cannot be like any other nation, whether it's because our enemies put us in that position or that is our destiny in the world. The chosen state can't be like any other nation. And so I want to read with you what Michael Oren writes. Michael Oren was, of course, the Israeli ambassador to the US and has been a fantastic advocate for Israel over the last 2 years, if you've been following him. And he writes as follows in source 10. Is Israel the chosen state? Syllogistically speaking, it must be. If we, the Jews, are the chosen people and the land of Israel is the chosen land, then the people who dwell in the land and the Jewish state established on it must also be chosen. But chosen how, one must still ask, and for what? Can a country founded largely on secular and universalist principles lay claim to a uniqueness grounded in spiritual and particularist ideals? Is Israel a country widely accused of the darkest transgressions, racism, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide, chosen only to be doomed? For many of its secular pioneers, Zionism was revolt against chosenness. It was an attempt to become a nation like every other. Rooted in the suffering caused by statelessness, chosenness was an affliction that only Zionism could cure. For all their differences, Herzl and Jabotinsky similarly dreamed of creating a modern, largely secular, liberal Jewish state, a normal state like the many others that dotted the map, the France or Austria of the Middle East. Yet Zionism's normalizing mission, its attempt to extricate Jewish peoplehood from chosenness, was only partially successful. Many Jews refused to abandon their religious beliefs and together with Christian Zionists, viewed the rebirth of Jewish statehood in the biblical homeland as a millenarian event. That state would be, in the words of Rabbi Rav Kook, Chief Rabbi of British Mandatory Palestine, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. Celebrating its creation was an article of faith. More than 3,000 years after God and the children of Israel chose one another, and after many agonizing months of war, the concept of Am Sgula remains powerfully relevant. So here he's taking us to the post-October 7th world. Whether on the battlefield or in the Israeli streets where opposing protests sometimes clash, it is a status we must always strive for and a title we must relentlessly earn. Israel, built by the chosen people on the chosen land, must prove it is chosen not by suffering and enduring hate, but by showing strength, seeking justice, and embracing peace. Not only to the world, but to ourselves, Israelis must affirm that chosenness is, in fact, our normal. This was written, I don't know if you follow, there's a journal called Sapir Journal put out by Bret Stephens, who's who's the last hope for the New York Times, I think. And it's actually a fantastic journal. You can't get it delivered in print in Israel. You can get it delivered in print in America, but you can read it online free. So yeah, his entire journal dedicated to the topic of chosenness, and this is his article. Yeah, the most recent, not the most recent one, the one before that. So what Michael Oren's really doing is he's laying out for us that this idea, all the challenges we had, the challenges and the blessings of being the chosen people throughout Jewish history have kind of been bestowed now in a different way on our status in the world in the modern era, which is being Israel, right? Israel and Zionism. So if the chosen people was always a challenge and brought about anti-Semitism, well, then the direct parallel to that is today, Israel and all the blessings and challenges of being in our own homeland has brought about anti-Zionism. And so what can we learn from how Jews have dealt with being the chosen people throughout history, and how we understood that? How can we apply that, if at all applicable? And this is what we're going to kind of explore here throughout the year. Is that applicable to being the chosen state, the chosen nation? And so these are really just opening up big questions for us more than giving answers, but I think he lays this out really well.
Isn't there also Hashem's command to Abraham, having him walk
Yes,
the distance
to come to Israel, that Abraham was called to make Aliyah, okay? Yes, but here's an interesting dilemma. Abraham is not only the father of the Jewish people, Abraham is also the father of Christians and Muslims. So what does that mean for us, right? But later we're told the Jewish people, right, the Jewish nation, this is our land. And of course, we live in this land, as people say on lots of podcasts now, we are the indigenous people to the land of Israel. And so yes, but it opens up, it doesn't solve our problems to say that Abraham was called to the land, unfortunately. It does and it doesn't, let's put it that way. So today we're going to shift to continue to think about this issue of Am Sgula in terms of chosen people, chosen land. So we're going to turn now to source sheet number 2. Okay. So we're going to take a step back and think about how Am Sgula was interpreted by commentaries. Okay, first we're going to look at Tanakh. I want to look at Tanakh a little bit and see, are there any other sources that help us understand what it means to be an Am Sgula, which you could call a treasured people or a chosen people. And how that gets understood is going to continue to help us understand different ways, meaning, does it have to be, if last week we spoke about why we're worthy of being chosen, this week I want to think about what does it mean to be Am Sgula, okay? Does it mean that we are more important, better, more beloved? And what does that mean about the status of the other nations? Is it in definition of the other nations or not? And how do we square that? And we're going to see that this is, we had, if we had some non-Jews sitting in the class with us, I think we'd be feeling, wow, how do we talk about this? It's not so simple. And so that's a good litmus test for thinking about this. Okay, so Mark Twain famously, you may know this essay, famously wrote an essay in Harper Magazine in 1899. He was amazed at the Jews. There's actually, I think, academic discussion about how much he was a lover of the Jews or if he also had a little bit of anti-Semitic language himself, because of course, when you're a non-Jew writing about how amazing the Jews are, it's a little bit of a fine line, right? And so he writes the following about the Jews. This is a well-known piece, and I think is a really great way to open up this question of what does it mean to be Skula. He says, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, right, statistically. But he is heard of, has always been heard of. His contributions to the world's list of great names are way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in the world, in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. The Jew saw them all and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no dulling of his alert mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. What is the secret of his immortality? Wow, it's a very powerful paragraph. And you feel, it's got within it this kind of admiration as well as hesitation. Rabbi Sachs shares a great story. We're gonna look at a lot of Rabbi Sachs today because this question of does being chosen make us better? Does this notion of a particular nation in the world having a different status? How do we understand that? This was something that really consumed Rabbi Sachs's writings. He talks about it in many places. As the chief rabbi of England, he was very interested in this, how he can preserve the particularness of the Jewish people and strengthen Jewish identity, while at the same time being a really positive influence, as he said, engaged with the world. So we're going to look at some Rabbi Sachs today. He has a great story about two Jews sitting in a coffee bar in Vienna. And one is reading the local Jewish newspaper, and the other is reading the anti-Semitic journal Der Stürmer. I hope I said that right. And the first one says to the second one, why are you reading Der Stürmer, that anti-Semitic rubbish? That's British speak. It's full of anti-Semitism. And the second one says, well, listen, look, you're reading the Jewish press, okay? And what do you read about? Jews are having fights with each other, right? The Kaplanistim and that Forum Tikva, everyone's arguing, they're assimilating, they're marrying out. All the Jewish newspaper is obsessed with everything that's going wrong in the Jewish community, in the Jewish world. What do I read in Der Stürmer, the anti-Semitic newspaper? Jews are controlling the media. Jews are controlling the economy. They're in control of the universe. If you want good news, go to the anti-Semites, which is a great story. But it also gives us a window into what we're seeing in our world today, which is that the proportion that Israel and Gaza are in the media are so wildly disproportionate and so wildly exaggerated in the scope of the world that it's exactly this point, right? And it's actually the flip of this point, because unfortunately, even though he's being quite mocking here, it's hard to find any positive or smiles in how the media talks about Israel. And so this really I think pinpoints this issue of how the world views the Jews and how the world views the state of Israel and how we can think about that. So let's look at Torah for a moment. I'm reminding you, I'm not going to read it inside. In source 2, we have the book of Shmot teaches us, as we've already read, that God says, you're going to be to me segula, a treasured nation, mikol ha'amim, from the other nations, kili kol haaretz. And last week we pointed out that this already makes us a little uncomfortable, because we could be skula, but why do we have to be skula, right? My daughter, I mentioned last week, got engaged. You choose you choose to marry someone, but you're not constantly thinking about the people that you didn't choose to marry, right? You just chose to marry that someone. And God saying, the world is mine, and I chose you from amongst all the nations. That's a little bit of a difficult point. In Dvarim, again, that language is used, that God promises the people of Israel that he's taken them out of Egypt, and Har Sinai is retold. And I'll just say this and then you'll tell me. And again, God says, I've chosen you la'am skula mikol ha'amim, okay?
Because they say that choose, making a choice presupposes exclusion of other options.
Making
a choice. In general, no, in general, like you.
What does that mean?
Use the example of like engagement.
Yes.
Choosing someone.
Means you didn't choose the others. Yes, it's true. At the same time, it's like this emphasis in the psukim that God is choosing us from all the nations. And remember, all the nations are still mine. Everything's mine here. The world is still mine. And we're going to see Rabbi Sachs has a way of reading this, which is very nice. But you, I'm choosing. I'm not choosing them. I'm choosing you. Okay, so how do we, right now it feels uncomfortable. So how do we deal with that? Okay, Rashi, of course, continues the uncomfortable reading. And again, this may speak to some people and no, that's all good. But the way Rashi understands this can be a source of, can be the kind of thing that either helps rationalize anti-Semitism, because of course Rashi lived in France in an era when there was tremendous anti-Semitism. He lived through the Crusades. There was tremendous persecution of Jews. And so when he's thinking about how to understand what it means to be the chosen people, he has that in his world's experience. And here's where he takes it in source 4. What does it mean to be Am Skula? Otzar Chaviv, a cherished treasure. Kmo uskulat melachim. Okay, so in Kohelet, the same language is used about the treasures of kings. Okay, so we are a cherished treasure of God. Kli yakar v'avanim tovot shemelachim gonzim ota. Kach atem tiyuli skula mishar umot. God is like a king who takes the most cherished stones and puts them in his chest and sets them aside. That is what we are to God. V'lo tomru atem levadchem sheli ve'en li achirim imachem. Now, don't say that you alone belong to me and that I have no other peoples beside you. Meaning, what else have I? The English here isn't so good. What's different is that I have made my special love for you more evident, more clear. So Rashi says something interesting here. On the one hand, we're that special stone that God has set aside. On the other hand, God's saying, I'm still also God of the whole world, but there's chibatchem nikeret, evident love, a manifest love, a clear love. Okay, it's obvious. And says Rashi, Kili kol haaretz vehem be'inai ulefanai leklum. But them, the others, the rest of the world, in my eyes and before me, they are nothing. You can almost feel, right? You can almost feel Rashi living in 11th century, right? 11th century France, 11th, 12th century France, saying these words. It's not that he did, the interpretation is what he sees, but it's so influenced in the same way that we're going to see Rabbi Sachs is influenced by his time. Reading these psukim, living where he was, it's an understandable and very reasonable interpretation of the verses. Of course, we have other perspectives, as you mentioned last week. You can also understand Am Skula in a much more, I'll call it politically correct, but also much more palatable way to modern people, which is Am Skula means we have a role to play in this world. We are chosen, right? In the world in general, some people are chosen to be leaders and other people are play more of a following role. We are chosen in this world as a leader. And so the way Yeshayahu depicts this in source 5, the prophets, of course, especially Yeshayahu, writes many prophecies, tells many prophecies of the Jewish people influencing the world. He has certain what we'll call universalist messages that we should be teaching the world certain values from Judaism. And this is called Or L'Goyim. And here, just by the way, to read these 2 verses, I'm reading them anew with you as preparing this class also was very moving. Says Yeshayahu in chapter 42, Ani Hashem kraticha b'tzedek ve'achzek beyadecha ve'tzarcha ve'tnecha levrit am le'or goyim. So God, in my grace, says God, I have summoned you and you have grasped you, okay, by the hands. I've created you and appointed you with a covenant, okay, to be the light unto the nations. And then, lifkoach einayim ivrot, lahotzi mimasger asir mibeit kela yoshvei choshech. I have appointed you to open the eyes that have been deprived of light. You are putting the glasses on the rest of the world so they can see clearly. what is morality, what is goodness, and rescuing prisoners from confinement who are sitting in darkness, right? Very, right, very powerful imagery here, right? So here, yes.
Excuse my lack of the, but Segula, according to Rabbi,
Google.
Google,
Google. Yes, means.
it says Segula translates to schedule.
Oh, no, that's probably a different use. Segel, who do we have a Lashon? You might be our best Lashon. Segel means faculty. So there's probably some Segula schedule. That doesn't sound right. Yeah, I will have to look that up and see. I'll research Rabbi Google. Yes. But Segel in university is the faculty, right? And so, which makes sense. The chosen ones, exactly. And so here, right, but I want to say that on the one hand, this seems very beautiful. This is much more palatable, this image. At the same time, there's still a little bit of patronizing in it, of condescension, right? We are gonna show you the truth.
The anti-Semites are gonna spin anything.
Yes, that's true. That's right. That's right. 100%. Right, calling Israel an apartheid state. It's ridiculous. Right, 100%. So
Lessons for us. Building purpose.
amazing. So you're totally going to where we're going to see Brett Stevens goes at the end, which is, we have a big question here. How do we think about being the chosen people in the chosen land? How do we think about chosenness in the context of what we are living through during these 2 years? And that one of the things he grapples with is, how much time should we be spending trying to convince, first of all, people who hate us deeply, and people who are just ignorant or, or easily swayed of the truth. And these are big questions, as opposed to focusing inward and thinking about who we are and strengthening our identity and doing tikkun in our own society. These are big questions for our time, and we're going to continue to think about them.
Yeah, it's difficult for us, for the Jews, to be the chosen people, and people in the world seeing us as the chosen people, that we have a higher standard to hold up to. It's very difficult because we're only human.
Yes. So is it difficult? Meaning, okay, so when a Jew does something really inappropriate, Madoff, okay, right? I think we do have a double standard. I think we do have, we get hit harder, let's say, right? On the one hand, we're going to see that one of the things that's unique and that is related to being the chosen people is that we have more Nobel Prize laureates than any other. Statistically, it's outrageous, right? That can be both a source of anti-Semitism and a source of incredible pride and inspiration. And what do we do with that? So yes, I do think I don't know if that answers the question, but I do think we get looked at with a little bit of, 100%. We're supposed to be the chosen people. So anything we do in Gaza is, genocide, horrendous, right? So we're held up to a higher standard. I think that's right. Yes, it's the blessing and the curse, the blessing and the burden, not the curse, the blessing and the burden. One other verse that's important to look at in the context of Am Skula is a verse we're not going to be able to think a lot about, but I will just say I have a whole nother class on this, which is a fantastic class, which is a verse that appears in Bamidbar when, interestingly, a non-Jewish king and a non-Jewish prophet are on their mission to curse us, when in fact, all the curses are generally believed to be turned to blessings. And so there's a big question, is this line a curse or a blessing, in the words of Bilam? As I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights, there is a people that dwells apart, not reckoned among the nations. Hen am levadad yishkon uvagolim lo yitchashev. So here the words of Bilam are very powerful and very open to interpretation. They can be seen on the one hand as our power, right? We will always be a people that dwells apart, whether we live in the diaspora or in Israel. Something about us is a little bit different, right? At the same time, when the Nazis said that something about us is a little bit different, that was not the words we'd want to hear, right? That's not what we meant. Not reckoned among the nations can be understood. The interpreters either say that when we dwell apart, then we're okay. But when we try to assimilate into other nations, then we're not reckoned among the nations, right? And this is I think this is a very powerful point too, because if you look at the world around us, we have, there are a lot of Jews who are trying to placate, I mean, it's astonishing where to start with that, because if you even think about the kibbutzim before October 7th, who all they wanted, they were such peacenikim and lovers of peace, and they just tried to embrace the false, the false possibility that they didn't know was false, of course, that there could be peace if they just were kind to their neighbors in Gaza, right? That conception was completely turned on its head. If you look at, there are Jewish leaders in New York, most of them speaking out against Mamdani. This week's the election, so we'll see next week what we'll be talking about in class. But at the same time, there are some surprising Jewish leaders coming out and trying to make sense of it, trying to say, okay, he's going to get in, so how are we going to make this work? How can we build bridges, right? And you have to ask yourself, wait, when are you crossing that line from being a people that dwells apart, a people with a strong moral backbone, to a people that's going to be not reckoned among the nations because you are bending over backwards to please and to try, right? With the best of intentions sometimes, but problematically. And so here we see our very difficult place. And I think in every generation we have to find it, right? And find that balance. And it's very complicated. So now we get back to our question of how do we understand it to mean that we are God's special treasured people, okay? Even if we don't use chosen, treasured people, what does it mean? And what does that mean about the other people? So look at what Umberto Cassuto, who is a modern Italian, relatively modern, from the modern period, interpreter of Torah, living in exile, living in diaspora before, of course, the state was established. He is going to take, again, everyone's coming from their place. Everyone's coming from a certain milieu, and we have to keep that in mind when we read this. They are, of course, biblical interpreters, and what they care about first and foremost is interpreting the Torah. They care most about what the words mean. At the same time, sometimes you just feel their life and world experience coming through in what they're writing. So this is what Cassuto says about God being the God of the whole world. Eineni rak Elohechem bilvad, ela Elokei ha'olam kulo. Eineni ke'Elokei Eretz Mitzrayim asher yatzatem misham, velo ke'Elokei Eretz Canaan asher ani mavi etchem shama. Elim elu af lefi ovdehem enam sholtim ela al amam bilvad. Something really powerful here. It says, when you look at the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greco-Romans, they themselves said that their gods were the gods of their nation alone. They never tried to argue that their idolatrous gods were also gods of the other nations. It's very interesting. And often when they talk about going to war with other nations, their gods are going to war. But says the Cassuto, the Jewish people are different, and God is different. Ve'ilu ani Elokei kol ha'amim kulam, ki li kol ha'aretz kol bnei ha'arti. This is a really different interpretation from what we were saying before. We were focused on am skula means that God, this really is a total turning this around, turning it on its head. We understood it as saying God is saying, you are my treasured people out of the other nations, meaning not them, I chose you, okay? Here, Cassuto is saying, no, read it like this. God chose you, but God is also the God of the whole world, the God of all the nations. And this is now going to be also the basis for some of the things we're going to see in Rabbi Sachs's writings. What does that mean then? How then do we understand being the chosen people if God's the God of everyone? God is the God of everyone, okay? The Hindus, the Buddhists, the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, everyone. But there's something unique about our role in the world as God's skula. Okay. I see you shaking your heads, and I see this appeals to people. This Forno also says something about this. He says as follows. He says on the words of Atem Tiyuli Mamlechet Kohanim, source 7, Ubaze tiyu sgula mikulam, ki tiyu mamlechet kohanim, lavinu la'arot lekol hamin ha'enoshi likro kulam b'shem Hashem, ulavdo shechem achad, כמו שיהיה עניין ישראל לעתיד לבוא, כאמרו, ואתם כהני השם, תקראו וכאמרו, כי מציון תצא תורה. So I'll translate now. So Sforno says, what does it mean to be am skula? You are treasured from all, meaning above all, okay? But what does that mean? What do you have to do? You have to be a mamlechet kohanim, okay? A kingdom of priests to understand, to learn, to interpret, to teach the whole world, all human beings of the world, kol hamin ha'enoshi, likro kulam b'shem Hashem. You teach them to call out in the name of God, okay? It's very, wow. And to worship God as one people, to serve God together. And this is the idea of Yeshayahu in a more universalist prophecy, that eventually the whole world is going to come to call out to our God, okay, to God, to the God of the world. They just, right? It's just a process until they get there. So perhaps a little more patronizing than Kasuto, but at the same time, does accept that this is not saying that God wants only a relationship with us. God wants a relationship with the whole world. God wants a relationship with other peoples, and we have a role to play in making that connection happen. Okay. One more reading. This is Avraham ben Harambam, actually two more readings. Avraham ben Harambam, who is the son of the Rambam, a little less known, unfortunately for him, but obviously still a worthy interpretation, says as follows. On the language, you shall be a mamlechet kohanim, kingdom of priests. Why did God tell the Israelites at Mount Sinai, you shall be a kingdom of priests, rather than you shall be me as priests, to me as priests? Meaning, why did it say mamlechet kohanim, as opposed to just you shall be to me kohanim? What does the word mamlechet add? God was instructing them to be role models, just like distinguished kings, okay? So if until now we've seen God being characterized in the interpreters as a king, now Am Yisrael are also kings in this world. Effectively, God was saying, you shall be on my behalf like kings for the world, as guides for them. So we see again and again that being the Am Skula does not mean that what we do is we sit in a Beit Midrash, we learn Torah, and we do mitzvot day in, day out. That there's something more. We're being called to do something more in this world. Being called to have a positive influence and to endear God's name to people of the world. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean when people around us are not open to that, are hugely against that, when it's at risk of our own life? When the entire world looks at Israel so negatively, how can we endear God's name to the rest of the world? And is there a point where we have to stop trying, or are these verses telling us we have no choice? We have to keep at it. These are very powerful questions. The Malbim takes us to the Or LaGoyim model and says on the words Or LaGoyim. The Malbim was also also in the modern period, Eastern Europe. And he lived at a time where there was a lot of assimilation of Jews in his society. And so he also famously says about the verse that you are destined to be alone, to dwell alone and not reckoned among the nations. He famously says, if you keep Torah, you'll be able to live alone, meaning, well, you'll be able to live in peace. If you assimilate, you won't be reckoned among the nations. So that's his famous interpretation of that verse. And he says something similar here, something that fits with that. Says, what does it mean to be Or LaGoyim? Elu avdei kochavim sheta'ir lahem ha'emunah leval yelchu ba'afel ve'yakiru achdut Hashem u'mefaresh neged la'or goyim. Here, what is your job to do? You live among the nations. So all these interpreters are writing before we have Medinat Yisrael and trying to make sense of these notions of Am Skula, Or LaGoyim. Okay, Am Levedad Yishkon. Says, Elena's nations, you have to enlighten the other nations about faith so that they do not walk in darkness, but come to recognize the unity of God. Okay, so here it's about teaching the world monotheism. We have to teach the world monotheism. So he's kind of interesting because on the one hand, the Malbim generally was very wary of interacting with non-Jews in society because there was a lot of assimilation and a lot of danger in that. And at the same time saw that that's still our purpose in the world is somehow to have that influence. And that is a delicate balance. That is a very delicate balance. Think about, I have a close family in the States who, and we have some friends from Chutz La'aretz on our Zoom and listening in. What do you do if you live in the United States? Do you send it's a big question. You're sending your child to university. Obviously, they're big enough. They also get to choose, right? Is it better to go to YU and to have a safe, comfortable, strong, and I'm not judging. I don't know what I would choose today, okay? Strong Jewish identity, be able to be comfortable in who you are, love for Israel, and really just build that up? Or is there a calling to go to these, right? If everyone starts going to YU, well, what does that mean about all these other campuses, right? Because some of the young students on college campuses are doing incredible work in spreading some light. Obviously, it's hard to see it, it's slow, and but it is happening. And so how do we strike that balance? That is what the Malbim is, I think, very much putting his finger on. Okay. So this brings us to the next issue, which is, well, if we are meant to be Or LaGuayim, spreading love of God in the world, well, what is really the ideal? Is the ideal that we are a strong Jewish people living in a world of people, of diversity, different religions, different nations, where we can all respect each other and we can be a positive light on other people. So in that world, we have a particularistic role, and there's something important about keeping your particularistic identity. Or do we want a world where everyone just becomes Jewish? Do we want a universal world where everyone becomes the same, right? Famously, John Lennon saying, imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. There was definitely in our upbringing and in our lifetime, this idea, and we see it around us a lot, that we should all be the same, that we should, the idea of universalism as an ideal has very much been promoted in the world. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of pushback, right? People who are trying to keep their own identity within societies and are coming into strong conflict with that, right? All of Europe is saying, just be European. And the immigrants, largely Muslim immigrants, are saying, no, thank you. And so that's causing a lot of the conflict in our world today. So here's where we get to Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs really writes about this. We could do a few classes on it. I'll try to, summarize some of the key ideas. He says, whereas the world promotes the idea that universalism is good and particularism is bad, in today's world, in the Torah, it's different. The Torah says something different. The book of Breshit, which we're very much in the midst of now, the first 11 chapters present a universalistic world, right? A world where there's no particularism yet. Adam and Chava, the humanity growing, Noah, okay? Until we get to Abraham in chapter 11, there is no particularism. And then in chapter 11 onward, we have the particular individuals, and eventually the particular people are chosen. Okay, and so we see that that this is something that the Torah is not saying it's one or the other. The Torah is saying both, and this is really, I think, one of Rabbi Sachs's greatest contributions to Torah thought. Several, but this is one of them. And so I want to read a little bit about his ideas. If you read source 11 in his book, Not in God's Name, where he tries to fight against the idea that really the Muslim idea that religion should be used to justify evil and killing and etc. He says as follows: for though God is our God, he is also this is source 11. For though God is our God, he is also the God of all, accessible to all. The God who blesses Yishmael, who tells the children of Jacob not to hate the descendants of Esav, who listens to the prayers of strangers, and whose messengers appear as strangers. Only a faith that recognizes both types of covenant, a universalist and a particular, is capable of understanding that God's image may be present in the one whose faith is not mine and whose relationship with God is different from mine. I think Rabbi Sachs is really, for the first time, able to articulate, and of course, articulating was his greatest talent, how we can be on the one hand, the Am Segula, and on the other hand, and also Or LaGoyim, while living in a world where we're not looking down on the people around us or saying we're better than the world does. He presents it in a way which is, I think, really incredible. He says also in his book, Future Tense, the result is a combination unique to the Hebrew Bible of universality and particularity. The human condition is universal, but the expressions of that condition are particular. Each nation, each language, each culture has its distinctive character. One nation, that of Abraham and his descendants, is charged with the duty of embodying in its history and laws the sovereignty of God. God took one man, then one people, and summoned it to be different, to teach all humanity the dignity of difference. Only the combination of particular faith and a universal God can yield this conclusion. If God is everywhere and has set his image on everyone, then God exists outside the Abrahamic covenant as well as within. That is the only form of theology that can yield the God-given integrity of otherness, the dignity of the stranger. The alternatives are tribalism, many nations, many gods, or universalism, one God, one faith, and only one gate to salvation, right? So we've had many people throughout history advocate for many tribes, many gods, or for the idea of everyone, Christianity, everyone has to subscribe to this God, right? And trying to get everyone to convert. Also, Islam has an aspect of that. Judaism never tried to convert the whole world to be Jewish. At the same time, we tried to present to the world God's view of morality. And so here we have this, this incredible combination of how to understand the particular and the universal. I want to read one more piece from Rabbi Sachs in source 15, which is really fantastically interesting and very relevant to the Parshat HaShavua. So you'll know that after the flood, after the Mabul, Hashem makes a brit. And the brit it's really the first brit in Torah, the first covenant, okay? And the brit is the 7 Noahide laws, which we in Judaism believe are laws that apply to all humanity, okay? And so here Rabbi Sachs develops this idea and shows that this can help us understand God's relationship to Jews and to the world. Says Rabbi Sachs, Judaism has not one moral religious code, it has two. What are they? What are the two codes? What are the two covenants? I'm thinking of two different phases, one after the flood and one at Mount Sinai. The one after the flood was the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the Noachide code, God's code with all humanity, 7 commandments. And the other, the Sinai code, his covenant with the Jewish people, 613 commandments, an impressive number, right? Now here are two different codes, and they are very different. One, a code for all humanity, two, a code for the Jewish people. And I'll pause there. So again and again, Rabbi Sachs returns to this idea that God wants to be the God of all humanity. God wants humanity to recognize the goodness in God's teaching and subscribe to some of Jewish life, right? Some of the Jewish ideas. And so Rabbi Sachs really spent a lot of his life balancing these two things. He really devoted himself to making Britain, the British Jewish community, stronger. He transformed the number of kids going to Jewish day schools in his lifetime. And at the same time, being able to speak in a way that he was being invited regularly to, BBC, do we have any Brits here? BBC Radio Hour, whatever it was called, he was really a beloved within British society as well. And I think that perhaps is the greatest embodiment of what it means to be Am Skula and Or L'Goyim, right? And to be able to be truly your own person, okay? And at the same, your own Jewish identity, and to be a positive influence on the world around you so that you're certainly reckoned in a positive way among the nations. Of course, I'm sure what's in the back of all your minds right now, or the forefront of your minds as I'm saying this is, well, what would Rabbi Sachs be saying to us today? What would be his wisdom on this moment? And there are many who are trying to think about that, but of course, we can't possibly know.
There could be a difference. It's a beautiful concept.
Yes, he is. It's a whole book, and the language is, his use of language is stunning. So I want to bring us back now to two final readings on two final ideas about being an Am Skula, and with this we'll close. The first is, what do we do with the state of Israel as an Am Skula? Michael Oren laid it out for us. This is both a blessing and a burden, and we're very much in the burden right now, right? How do we deal with this? So first of all, I want to say that David Ben-Gurion, in one of his famous addresses, Ben-Gurion was a great lover of Tanakh. He knew Tanakh, he learned Tanakh, and he uses this notion of Or L'Goyim about the state of Israel. And of course, again, this is going to feel antiquated for our world today. At the same time, it's still something we can aspire to. Ben-Gurion said in source 13, "Historia lo pinka otanu b'koach, b'osher, b'shtachim rechavim, u'berov am." History has not endowed us with strength, riches, expansive territory, or huge population. Aval hi ha'enika lanu tchuna musarit v'intellectualit bilti metzuya. However, it has given us a moral character and unrivaled intellectual ability. V'hi mezaka u'mechayevet otanu liot or l'goyim. And this qualifies us and requires us to be a light unto the nations. You know, it's fascinating because he said this so many years ago, and yet it feels so relevant, right? And it's also interesting because if these words were in the mouth of a non-Jewish leader, right, it might feel a little bit borderline anti-Semitic, right? Like, you know, the Jews are, you know, right, sorry.
Held to a higher standard.
Yeah, and also, well, also like, oh, we're smarter than everyone,
Right.
right? That's a little dangerous to say. And yet, what do you do with this? I don't know if anyone recently was hearing, he was on the radio a lot last week, 2 weeks ago, Joel Mokir. Anyone hear of Joel Mokir? Okay, he was just chosen to be one of the Nobel Prize winners this year. He wasn't up against Trump, so we don't hate him. And he won it for his research into the economic and intellectual roots of technological progress and population change. And why did I hear him? Because he was interviewed on the radio. He's Israeli American. He lives in America. And he was interviewed on the radio because he got the email that he won the prize the morning that of Erev Simchat Torah, that the 20 hostages were coming out. And so he said, I was so engrossed with what was going on with the hostages and was glued to the TV. They didn't notice. All these people were texting me, congratulations, Mazal Tov, oh my goodness, it's amazing. He's like, what are they writing to me for? And he knew he was a candidate. He didn't think he was going to get it. I mean, who knows what he really thought. And so then he opens up his email and sees like, 100,000 emails that he has to answer to. And realizes he won the Nobel. And but what am I saying this for? Because here is this Jewish guy who is just, yet another unbelievably, and what does that say about us? Is that something that we're born with? Is that something in our DNA that has developed over the years? Is that we have always been a people of the book? We have always been the famous, I think, Nobel physicist said that his mother has a big part in winning the prize, because every day he would come home from school and instead of asking him what he learned today, she would say, what good question? What question did you ask today? What good question did you ask today? And so here we have another layer of what it is to be Am Segula, the chosen people, right? We have this role in the world that has something to do with what Ben Gurion's talking about here, which is we're never going to be an empire of land or people. And yet we're an empire of the mind, right? We're an empire of what we can contribute to the world. And here's a really interesting twist on this. If you think about, on the one hand, there's a lot of boycotting arms of Israel, right? All that, like the threats that other nations are going to stop buying. And yet here's the irony. The world is watching the incredible accomplishments of what we've made here, of these brilliant minds who, and I'm very blessed. I have 2 children in intelligence, and I see what the army has enabled them, how much they have learned and grown and be able to be these incredible, what they've done for them. If the Israeli school system is pathetic, when they get to the army, it can be great. And so I think that, some of these nations are not going to boycott arms because they're going to see, right? This is perhaps where this gets turned on its head, that sure, you want to boycott us, you want to, scream at us, but at the end of the day, our wisdom and the good we can contribute to the world, you're using it, right? Are using all the medical inventions that we've done. And so this really leaves us with this dilemma. So this brings us to Bret Stephens, and I say Rav Yaakov again is worth reading on your own. But Bret Stephens, he has a whole article. I'll try to send to our group. We have a WhatsApp group. If you're not on it, please join. I'll help you join after class. And I sometimes send articles and things and recommendations. And I love if anyone wants to send me anything. So Bret Stephens has this article, Jews were chosen to think. Our chosenness is that we were chosen to think. And this brings us back to Avraham, because Avraham is called Avraham HaIvri. And the Midrash says, what does it mean to be HaIvri? It can mean the Hebrew. It can also mean the guy who stands ever, right? Me'ever, on the other side. And we'll develop this idea more over the course a lot of these ideas that I'm saying here, we're going to keep getting back to. But this idea that Abraham was able to look at the world differently and protest what everyone accepted as the norm and good and acceptable, right? And that's a big question in our world today. Who is being ha'ivri in our world today, in Israeli society, in the world at large? And so Bret Stephens, I'm not going to read this whole thing. You're welcome to read it on your own. He goes through all the incredible obituaries of Jews who have transformed their respective fields in the world, okay, which are published in the New York Times, whatever. And he says, if you go to the bottom of page five, the last two lines, this record of staggering achievement in so many fields almost invariably leads to the question of what exactly makes so many Jews so smart. It's a subject of pride, controversy, misgiving, anxiety, denial, misunderstanding, and calumny. Some Jews worry that to speak of these achievements, much less boast about them, invites anti-Semitism. Some non-Jews think the pride Jews take in their intellectual accomplishments signals a conviction of innate superiority over others, itself an anti-Semitic thought. But whatever the consequences of wondering what makes individual Jews smart, it's simply the wrong question, says Brett Stevens. And here, he basically, I'm going to skip to the next paragraph. So, if Jews were chosen to think, what should we be thinking about? Three things, mostly two of them are familiar. First, it's to think about being a holy nation. This requires more than following a script or deferring to authority. It demands insistent reflection. What is the maximum size of an Eruv? Why do we hang mezuzot a certain way? How do we know when a war is just? Judaism an invitation to puzzle our way through a faith of caveats, complications, and contentions. Second, Jews need to think about repair. Whether it's Jarvik designing an artificial heart or Friedlander teaching a younger generation of Germans about the horrors of their grandparents inflicted on her, all this mending of what is broken and straightening of what is crooked has been the worldly work of exceptional Jews ever since their ancestors were freed from the ghettos and fled the shtetls. This should not compete with the requirement of being a holy nation. It extends and in many ways completes it. And he says there's a third topic, and that's the thought we must devote to our survival as a people and as Jews. And there, right, he goes into this big question of how do we deal with the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the world today, and at the same time focusing on ourselves as a people and strengthening that. How do we balance those two things? What does it mean for what's happening in the world of the Western democracies, and how does that interact with Israel and what we want to be? And these are the big questions that we have to think about now. So with that, I'll just leave it an open question because that's what we're supposed to do. And wish everyone a good rest of the week. And if you haven't signed up, please sign up. And yeah, and if you're not on the WhatsApp, let me know and I'll try and get you on. Hi, Don. How are you? So nice to see you. You look great. Really good to see you.
Karen and
I hope to get back in soon.
Sorry?
Hope to get back in soon.
Oh, I would love to see you here. You look great. I'm so happy to see you. That made my day. Flash Lema.
Connections now.